And it's been our chance to reflect on Trinity, our past, and where we are today and our future, and to honor all of that. And I have to say, I've learned so much about Trinity, having been able to do this work. And one of the great joys of this has been working with Doug Brackenridge, who was an amazing advisor to Hugh and I when we got started, and has been with our committee all along as an advisor, a guide, participant. And Doug's going to tell us a little bit about looking back to the future.
Could I break in and say a word?
Break in, please.
Okay, that I'm honored to have you. I take it as an honor that you're here, and I have watched your work. And you and Jacob, you've worked on this 150th anniversary. And as I said before, I only picked one person to do this interview with me, and it was you. Okay.
Thank you, Doug. And I want to say also, because Doug has been so careful to pay attention to the archives and to our history, that it is January 22nd, 2019 for all of those of you watching this in the future. And we are in the Trinity Tiger Network studios in the bottom of the Coates Library, which so many of our alumni and friends can relate to the Trinity Library. I'm an alum of Trinity. I graduated in the class of 91 and then 92 Master of Arts in Teaching, which I'm really proud of since I teach in that program now. And Doug, that's enough about me, because we do want to get to you. You are the star of the show. And one of the first questions that I know people are going to want to know is, how did you come to Trinity?
How did I come to Trinity? I'll tell you as quickly as I can of a complicated story. I came to Trinity sight unseen, had never been any farther south than southern Texas, drove from Montreal, Canada to San Antonio in an unair-conditioned Volkswagen bus with my family. And I was introduced to the vice president of the university when I first came. I had never met him. I had never met the chair of the department. And what happened was, when I met Dean Bruce Thomas, the first thing he said to me was what I have on the screen: Doug, you're a pig in the poke, and we hope that things will work out for you. And I was left with that to start out my career at Trinity University. But that's how I got here. I had been in Scotland working on my PhD. It was overseas, and in those days, no cell phones. I didn't even have a telephone over there. So it was a wonderful experience. I couldn't have come to any better place.
Sight unseen. And I love seeing that picture of you. And I've heard so much about Bruce Thomas, too. So from now on, we're going to call you a pig in a poke, and I think it turned out well.
Yeah, well, a pig in a poke, in case you don't know what that means, it means that you have bought something sight unseen, and you were very unsure of its quality. That's what I got, and that was what reinforced me with hope when I came to Trinity. All right.
And what motivated you to write a history of Trinity? You've been our historian, and you've written the history.
This over here. Wait, okay. What motivated me was really that I majored in history. I was very much interested in history. And when I came to Trinity, we were approaching our 100th anniversary. And Don Everett of the history department asked me to do a history of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, who were the founders of Trinity University. And that got me into Trinity history, and it got me into Texas history. And to give you some idea of how limited my knowledge was, I thought I lived in Bexar County. I did not know that I was living in Bexar County.
Yeah.
But I spent years working on that book, and I became really fascinated with the history of Trinity. And then, as I was reaching retirement, at the end of the century, Dr. Calgard was retiring, and I thought, it's time now to have another history, maybe to fill in from what was written back at the 100th. And Dr. Calgard was very supportive, and also was Dr. Brazil. And so I was able then now to work not just on the Cumberland Church, but the Trinity history. And that's how I got into all this.
And how did you pick the title for our conversation, Looking Back to the Future, Trinity's 150 years. How did you pick that title? I know it meant something to you.
Well, as a historian, I've always had the sense that you don't really understand anything until you see it in its context. You don't understand something until you see the roots, its history. And I put it on a personal level. I'd say, when you're making a friendship or wanting to have a relationship, what do you usually do? You say, well, where'd you come from? What was your family? And do you like this and do you like that? Well, to me, an educational institution is something that is alive. It's dynamic. It's not static. So that when you really want to understand Trinity University, you need to know something about where it came from and how it got to where it is today. And I think it's not just simply that knowledge, but it does help you, for people who are working today, to know what direction they should go or could go, because they understand the past. And that's why I say, looking back, you're really looking back not just for nostalgia, but you're looking back in order to function better in the future.
That's right. I think that's so important. And I know, listening to my grandparents tell stories to understand how our family decided to do certain things, or why we have these peculiarities that make us unique. And
Right.
so we have a lot of uniqueness at Trinity that we're going to talk about.
Right.
We're going to talk
A lot of
about
it.
change, and we're also going to talk about continuity, right?
Okay.
Both of
Right.
those.
Right
So
on.
one of the questions that I always wondered about when I was applying to Trinity and wanted to know, and I know people ask about, is how did Trinity get its name, or where does the name come from?
Okay, this is one of the most confused bits of information you get about Trinity University. When they talk about its name, in the modern times, you often hear that the name Trinity comes from 3 colleges that preceded Trinity. They all failed. They never really got off the ground, but that's where we got the name. And I say to myself, how would you ever want to name a school after 3 ones that failed? And you don't want to advertise that. So the name Trinity University simply is this: that the founders of the school, they were Christians, and they wanted to have a name that would reflect that. But at the same time, they didn't want to simply have a name that might be the Cumberland University in Texas. That they wanted something that would be a little bit more universal and general. And so they came up with the name Trinity. And they named that for the Christian Holy Trinity. And there were 3 founding synods. They were the geographical organizations that supported the university. So they had a theological, and they had a kind of a practical, saying, we're going to incorporate these 3 groups into our new institution. And then the other part of it, university. It was not a college. They did not want to be just a college. They wanted to be a university, and one of the terms they used, a university of the highest order.
The highest order.
So that's where we get. I'll tell you one other derivation of the name I got, and this was on a bit of Trinity publicity. I don't think it went out over an internet, but they said the name Trinity came from the 3 locations: Tuwakana, Waxahachie, and San Antonio. And I said, I knew those founders were great, but I didn't know they could predict what would happen in the future that way. So no, just for religious purposes, and for the fact that they wanted to be clear they wanted to be a university and not a college.
So one thing that is really unique about Trinity that you've mentioned are these locations. We've been in 3 different cities, and we've been in 4 different locations. That is not typical of universities.
No, that's not at all. In fact, it's really very, very unique that I think we're the only college or university that's active today that has moved as many times. We've had 3 different locations and 4 different campuses. We started in a town called Tuwakana in 1869. We were there till 1902. Then we were in Waxahachie from 1902 to 1942. And then we were in San Antonio, 1942 to the present. But the first 10 years here in San Antonio, we were on another campus. I came across a reference in one of the San Antonio newspapers, and they referred to Trinity as a university on wheels.
That's right. That's what he said. A reporter said we were the university on wheels.
We were the university on wheels.
And we have a picture of those locations, don't we?
Yeah, we had. All right. Well, we have these.
Wait,
these.
let's go back 1 or 2.
Yeah.
I think because we have
We need to go back here.
different cities.
Okay. Wait, I'm going the wrong way here. Okay, here we go.
There we are.
There we are. Those 3 places were where we that we had located. But now the question is,
Why did
we have to move?
Why did we keep moving?
Okay,
That's right.
survival.
Yeah.
That was it. basic reason. Each time, for various factors, financial, otherwise, it was a matter of either survive or close. That's
going to be a theme we're going to encounter a few times.
They're going to encounter that over again. I liked what this Trinity trustee said back in 1953. You know, Trinity was born in a crisis and it's been in a crisis ever since. But
not right now. We want to assure everybody Trinity's doing really well.
Yeah, but please reassure President Anderson. Right.
Yes,
Not
right.
now. We're not in any
No
kind
crisis.
of financial bind now, but we did have a lot of crises in our history.
Solved by moving.
All right, and it was solved by moving.
So let's start with Tawakona.
We start with Tawakona. And so why did they go to Tawakona? Well, there's several reasons. One is, and I'm going to deliberately go back here again, if you look at that map where you see where Tawakona is, at that time, that was about the center of the population of Texas. So it wasn't like they were in the wilderness. They were close to where there were a lot of people and a lot of Cumberland Presbyterians who would be interested in going to a university like Trinity. But what really fascinated them about Tawakona was its isolation. Back in the 19th century, the philosophy was, if you're going to have a college, you got to keep these kids away from any temptation.
No vice.
And Trinity, in their first catalog, Trinity is free from the temptations of vice abounding in the towns of the country. And the next year, they put in Trinity is absolutely free.
Absolutely free.
So they were really they thought.
Well,
that
I
was
think
important.
the next picture is going to assure people how
Right.
free they were of
This
vice.
is downtown Tawakona in 1869. A general store, a cotton gin, a post office. That's about it. How'd you like to go to a school like that?
There's a German phrase, das der Hund begraben. There's not much happening right there. Yeah.
Well, but just think, you could go and watch some gin cotton. You could
Sure.
maybe collect stamps at the post office, right? But that was about it. And here's the way you got to Tawakona. You came on a horse-drawn cart, and that is the actual horse-drawn cart. They did not want to be near a railroad. They wanted to be separate because railroad brought in evil people and so forth. So from the whole time they were there, 1869 to 1902, that's the way you got to Trinity, was coming up on a...
Kind of looks nice these days compared to the freeway, right? 1604.
Right,
No.
but you know, they had problems there when the road got washed out
That's
and everything
right.
else. So yeah, it was a problem.
And look at that faculty.
There's the Trinity faculty. If you think about the school and what it is now, and you look at that, that's the faculty. But if you look closely at that, you notice there are a number of women in that
That's
photo.
right. I see
They
that.
did not teach in the college. They taught, when Trinity started, it had everything from kindergarten, grade school, primary, and high school. So the women were teaching in the grade schools, and at least one of those men was teaching in the high school. And then one of the men there is a trustee, and so you boil it down, you got about 3 people that were actually faculty. And
Yeah, people don't know that it started not just with university students, but younger students as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that when they did on opening day, they had 7 students and 5 professors, and my wife tells me that's a 1.4 to 1 student faculty ratio.
Diane would know.
You can't beat that,
Put
but
that in a
it's
SACS
not very
report.
profitable.
No.
Okay.
Well, let's look at the senior class.
Well, let's see here.
7.
Right. Get the size of the class. There's a graduating class for about 4 or 5 students, and by the time they got to the end of the century, we had lost the student body. People did not want to invest in such a remote institution, so they had to decide, what do we do? Do we close, or do we move?
And we know the answer to that.
We know the answer, and
We
we're
moved.
glad we know the answer.
Yes.
They moved.
We moved to Waxahachie.
They moved to Waxahachie.
Look at that thriving metropolis.
Right. It was a county seat of about 7,500 people. And one of the writers said when they came to Waxahachie, it was only 70 miles away, but they came out of the woods.
Literally.
They literally came out of the woods. And that at the same time, they had a small town that was also rather controlled that one of the things that before they moved to Waxahachie, they insisted that Waxahachie become dry.
Oh, that's right.
No saloons, no liquor. And they also built the campus on the outskirts of town. They didn't go into the town. They stayed out there. So I always say Tawakona was isolation, Waxahachie's insulation. All right?
Yes, right.
They're insulated, but they're now where they have the amenities of a town. They have railroad connections. They have everything that they need with some financial backing. And this is what the way they advertise for Waxahachie today, because some people have said about Trinity history, the reason they moved from Tawakona was nobody could pronounce the name, so they moved to Waxahachie. So, but you know
That
that's
still happens in the Coat Center when you're there. You have to explain to people how to say
but
the different
you know that's
room
not
names.
true. And there is the campus. What the campus
Beautiful.
they built a very attractive campus. They had some financial backing. They were doing very well. And you see
We
some of
even
the
had some
students here.
athletics, yeah.
I like this photo. You see these? They're obviously getting ready to go to a football game, and they're dressed up with their automobiles. And that was the one thing that really did make a change going from Tawakona. By the time they got to Waxahachie, they were having automobiles. That changed their whole way of life. And there's a few Trinity women enjoying the outside view with the main building in the background. But one of the things that there's a lot of things that are important about the move to Waxahachie. They became part of the larger Presbyterian church. They became accredited. They dropped all their preschool. It became only a university. But one of the other items is that for the first time, it was only in Waxahachie really, that they had any athletic team. The philosophy back in Tawakona was those things are just a waste of time. And so we had no intramurals, we had no intercollegiate activity, and it was only then in 1900, just before they moved to Waxahachie, that we had our first football team, which, by the way, we got beat by Baylor 19-0. So, but that was a start.
But this is an important story,
and this
right?
is one other story as to why athletics were important was we weren't playing rinky-dink schools. We were playing UT, Texas A&M, Baylor, Texas Christian. They had a different name then, but we were and playing UT, and so. Even though we were much smaller, we were competitive, and usually we could play them for a half, and then we fell behind. But we had one high moment,
Listen to this, Coach.
and that
Urban
was
and
when
team.
in 1927 we scored a touchdown against UT. We had never scored a touchdown UT. UT did not want us to ever score a touchdown, and we scored it. By the way we scored it was he blocked a punt in the end zone and fell on it, and we got 6 points. They never scheduled us again, okay?
We left on top.
And also...
Yeah, what about the women's?
Well,
yeah, the
we
women's
had 'em
athletics.
there.
There's our
We had
basketball
'em.
team in 1904.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
We had them there, and look, we even had
Tennis.
You had a tennis team. That looks pretty good, doesn't it?
It does look pretty good.
Well,
I think
you
you're
don't
about
have
to
the
tell
whole
me
you
something,
don't have the whole
right? You're about
story,
to tell
okay?
me something.
You look at that. The thing is with the women, they were not allowed to play intercollegiate. They could only do what we would call kind of intramural or extramural, and they often had to be chaperoned. You didn't go to a game, you had to be chaperoned. You couldn't travel very far. You had to stay pretty close to it. And I included that cartoon where it says Drain Hall. That was the women's hall, and you see that their idea of women's athletics was
I know, I
over a
can't even
stretch.
tell you what I thought the first time I saw this,
Yeah,
but I think
right.
it's good to see it. You've been doing a lot of research on the evolution of women's athletics at Trinity.
And for women, it was not until 1972 when Title IX came in, that's the first time they were ever able to have a women's intercollegiate athletic program. Over 100 years before they got the
That's why it's
I got to
important
play.
to look back and
But
learn
then
history.
we're moving on, that even though everything seemed to be going well, all of a sudden the Depression hit, same kind of problems. Waxahachie was a one
Small
industry
town, yep.
town, and the endowment was not really all that great, and they used the endowment to kind of keep going. But finally,
We hit that question
could we
again, right?
say it together?
Yeah.
It was either move or close.
right.
Move or close.
Move or close.
And so they decided that
To
they would
move.
move again. They were invited to come to San Antonio, and before that, we had almost completed a merger with Austin College. That would have
I didn't
changed.
know that until
that
I
would
read
have
the
changed our
history.
one vote.
One vote.
That the idea that merging these two, each one is going to lose its identity, and so, but we were willing, the Trinity, we were desperate. We'd take anybody that would keep us going. But Austin College said no. It was best for both of us. Austin College is a fine
Yes,
school
the
today,
things have
wonderful
turned out well
school,
for both
and for
schools.
Trinity, it was a wonderful thing to come to San Antonio. So we had isolation, insulation, and now we come to we're going to have integration. All right.
But at a tricky time.
At a tricky time,
Yep.
we remember what the trustee had said. Trinity's been in the crisis, born in
and
the
ever
crisis.
since
Our invitation really came the day after Pearl Harbor, December 8th, 1941, and but again, this was a move that I think that completely changed our history, because we were no longer going to be really a small church college in a small town. We were now in a large metropolitan area.
Overcoming adversity,
Right.
all the time. But look at this is the
And
Woodlawn
there was
campus.
another bit of an adversity that we don't always mention but the move to San Antonio, we lost our accreditation because we merged with San Antonio College, and they had lost their accreditation. So we lost our accreditation. We had to get that back. And the Woodlawn campus was an older campus, and as you can see from the aerial view, there are a lot of temporary buildings in there. And the main building, which is the classroom building, Dean Thomas told me that when the classes changed, the building actually shook. It actually wobbled. And the cartoon there is the slingshot hitting the building, that it was going to come down.
The ceiling was caving in.
We
you
had
were
one
saying,
incident where up on the fourth floor, the legs of a piano came down through the ceiling. So that's how bad it was, okay?
So maybe it was time to move.
Maybe time. So that they decided they couldn't build on that campus. So they looked around and they found
This might be one of my favorite photos of
there's
the
a
show.
lot lot of
so
options.
cool.
And if you look at this photo, you're looking back down where we would be now at Woodlawn and Interstate 10. You're looking north. You see the water tower to the north. This was an abandoned stone quarry. It was a very controversial kind of a move, but it turned out to make it as one of the really unique universities. And the two people that were responsible for it, O'Neill Ford was the architect. He did the designs of the buildings that you now see. James W. Laurie, he raised the money to pay for them, okay? And then here's a quick shot of what the campus looked like in the 1950s. You can see we're just starting to build. I think there's to be Miller and Calvert down there, and to the right is Northrop Hall, as it used to be. But we began to grow, and finally, by the end of Dr. Laurie's career in 1970, this is what the campus looked like. And you can see that it's still not complete, but considering what you looked at in that last screen with nothing, if we build, they will come.
That's right.
Okay, and
yes.
we
might come back to this one a little bit because we have a story about that big hole there. That's Laurie
Right.
Auditorium.
Right, we'll come back to
Don't
it.
look at that, Kevin Hawkins.
Okay, we'll come
Right.
back to that then.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay, and
There's our modern campus.
there's the
coming
there's the
along.
modern campus.
And San Antonio growing in the background,
It's-
too.
That's why we call it the skyline. Okay.
So we want to talk now about a little bit of both continuity and change. And one place that we've seen a lot of change at the university is in the curriculum and how it's changed over the
Right.
years.
As I mentioned earlier, that the vision of these people was a university, not just a university of the highest order. And we have a quotation where they say, we may never see this reach maturity, and our children may never see it, but we believe this is going to happen. So they had this hope, they had this vision, they had these aspirations. And so even there in that little dinky town of Tawakana, They started out, they had a law school, they tried to have a medical school, they tried to have a theological school, they offered some PhDs. No success.
No.
They didn't have the
Very
constituents.
ambitious.
They didn't have the
Right, yeah.
constituents to do it. And so, as we again indicated earlier, that even though they wanted to be this great institution, they taught kindergarten, they taught commercial classes, they had business schools, they had schools for teachers. And here's a shot of what some of the students look like, and you look at those on the screen, you'll see most of
So
those were
great.
not college.
No, they're not.
They look like
at those young
they
folks.
look like they ought to be back in grade school someplace. And there's the business college, and by the way, just as an aside, even there, the things they did, they tried to do with class. And if you'll notice, I think of and that one it mentions that they do typing.
Typewriting.
They
I
do
know you're gonna have to
typewriting.
peer in there.
That
but
was
yeah.
big time stuff. Typewriting. But when we moved to Waxahachie, by that time it was clear that we were not able to do graduate work. So from the whole time, 1902 to 1950, we were strictly undergraduate. No graduate courses of any shape or form. So we can move on that.
Until we come back to graduate
Until we come
programs.
back to in San Antonio now.
Yeah.
And the reason why we started, it was after World War II, no UTSA in town, and most of the other schools were not offering much in the way of graduate program, and there was a demand for it. So we started out with just these three, Master of Science, Master of Arts, and over time, by the 1970s, we had more than 30 different master's degrees.
Yeah.
And so we were, again, becoming to be a university. And again, we have a picture
That's a
of
pretty
of
dynamic
Thomas,
duo there, right?
A dynamic duo. And you know, sometimes when I look at this photo in this context, Bruce Thomas doesn't look threatening at all. You know, I think he's okay.
I have heard a lot of stories
right,
about
but we
him.
had a good relationship, and he always, with that, when my pig in the poke story came up, he always laughed, and he says, well, that's what you were. So we got along fine. But the other thing that happened then was, particularly Dr. Laurie, he wanted to offer a PhD. And the building we call Chapman now was called Chapman Graduate Center.
Right.
And it was not just for master's degrees. They wanted to do a PhD. And I think it was a good thing that we didn't go that direction. The faculty didn't want to do it. The Southern Association said you're not prepared to do it. And I think it really was a blessing that we didn't move that way. The real
Dr.
change came
Calgard
when
came,
Dr.
right?
Calgard came in the late 1970s. And he, again, you know, they all have to have visions.
They're right.
They all have a vision. And he had a vision of something that was pulling from the past. Okay, he was going to pull from the past, but he was going to also adapt it
Make
to
it
the
modern and have an interpretation for
to the
day.
modern. And as he said, you know, you have to make decisions, you have to decide, and you have to follow through. Most of the things that Dr. Calgard implemented, we had been talking about for a long time.
And he brought them to fruition.
But not doing anything
That's right.
about it. Okay.
Including residential.
And right.
That was a big push of
right.
his, right?
Out of all these other things he did, I just want to say that bit about residential is that we think of Trinity as always being a really residential. You go back to Tawakona, it wasn't residential. They didn't have any residence halls. They stayed in
That's
home.
right,
Go
at
to
home.
Waxahachie. It took us a while. The women had a little place, but most of them lived in towns or commuted. Come to San Antonio. We jump from having student bodies of 300 or 400 or 500. We now jump up to having like 2,500. Most of the students, when I came in 1962, were what we call town students, commuter students, part-time students, and we only had a few residence halls, so we couldn't be residential. But Calgard said, if we're going to be what we want to be, we've got to be residential, and that's when we built the extra residence hall, and that's where we came to be where we are now, but we didn't have that residential requirement.
When I
before.
came as a student in '87, that's when they first put the first year quad together.
Right.
So we were residential and even housed in that learning community.
Right. And there was a lot of opposition to that. I mean, almost all these things. If you can imagine, a president comes in. I always said that Calgard, he came from Kansas. He came like a Kansas tornado, you know. He hit like a tornado, and he upset faculty, he upset trustees, he upset students, but he pushed and achieved, give us the foundation for what we have today. But
So-
okay, other
You want to
changes
talk
here.
about changes in the church
Change
relationship?
the church, because I think that's another change that is often misunderstood. That if you go back to the early days, all right, that one of the first things in the catalog said that although we're Cumberland Presbyterians, we're not sectarian. I would call generic Christian. And so you didn't have to pass a test to be a certain denomination, and you didn't actually have to pass a test if you were a professor. But it was assumed that you were going to be a Christian, all right? And I have a few quotations here that just simply are reaffirming this idea that we are a Christian and that these Christian values are very much part of who we are. But by the time I came in 1962, things were already changing. It used to be that the president, like when Dr. Laurie, he would examine everybody. What church do you go to? Do you belong to a church? With the faculty. But even by the time I came, they were not asking those questions because we had already have people who were not even nominally Christian, but they were outstanding scholars, and that's what Laurie wanted. He always asked them, "Are you comfortable with our mission statement?" As long as they said yes, you were in. So it was changing, and a lot of the faculty were saying, "Hey, I don't know about this bit about so much Christian influence," but it was there. But it was changing, and what was happening was instead of really pushing advertising about being Christian, I just picked up two advertisements from the 50s and 60s. You notice that nothing about church, nothing about denomination.
The modern university.
The modern
University
and University in the Sun.
Yeah.
The faculty did not like that one.
No.
The University in the Sun, lying around in the sun, having a good time.
Sunbathing.
No way. They didn't like that. And Calgar didn't like that, and that went out.
He changed that.
But what happened was in 1869, when we were celebrating our 100th anniversary, the denomination, not Trinity, the denomination said, we think the time has come to end any legal ties with our universities, where they had about 45 universities. And the only connection with legal-wise was that the Synod of Texas, or whatever synod was part of a relationship with the college, they had the right to appoint trustees. It was a kind of pro forma thing. They were not involved in the curriculum and day-to-day activities, so it wasn't like some other denominations that controlled the school, but it was legal. And so it was the church that said, we think this is time to end. We can't support you financially. Trinity had a $10 million budget then, and they were given about $30,000. So we don't hold anything, and we want you to be on your own. But they said, we recommend that you can have a covenant relationship. And a covenant relationship is just simply non-legal, but you say, the school says to the church, you're part of our past. We don't want to forget you. We want to remember. The church says, you're part of our past. We don't want to forget you. So we do have a covenant, and it gets renewed every so many years. But in our case, it's a rather distant relationship, but that's what it is.
Well, you and I talked the other day about that quotation that at Workwell as a university, that was the mission, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so then other continuity and change, we know that there's been continuity in terms of the curriculum and especially pedagogy, the pedagogy that
Did you come up with that one?
That is a little bit of my wheelhouse, right?
Did you come up with that?
We'll talk a little bit about teaching at Trinity and how that's changed over time.
I don't remember.
I can only attest to modern day.
Okay, well,
so
I don't
help
remember
me.
ever coming up with that, but I thought maybe you had done that. No, okay, all right. That despite all the change, for the moment, forget about change. There was really a lot of continuity, and I'm only going to pick out two important ones. There's others.
And I'm glad these are the two.
Pardon?
I'm glad these are the two.
These are the two? You think they were good ones?
I think they're good ones,
Okay, all right. That, what we call progressive pedagogy. If you think back to the 19th century, how did students learn at Trinity University and all the other colleges and that around? There was no lecturing. They didn't lecture. They recited.
Recitation.
They were assigned something to read, they recited, and it was either okay or it was not okay. And sometimes the professor didn't even do the listening. It would be an upper division, upper class student who did that. Trinity did start that way, but it didn't last long because we became coeducational. And coeducational was, again, something that was very controversial. And we lost some people, and trustees resigned, but the faculty said, this is a better way of educating young men and women to be in the same environment. It used to be there, even when they had coeducational schools. They built one building for the women and one for the men, but we were too poor, so we had them all in the one building. So, but we were coeducational, and I think we take that for granted now, but
That's
we
right.
were one of the few that did that, and I think that was a good example. There's an
a
English
class
class,
together.
you see the men and women together there, and that the other things, just I won't go through all of these, but the fact that by the end of the 19th century, you know, we had begun to drop all these other early schools, that we had elective courses. They didn't have
that
elective.
was very unusual.
But you know how they decided the elective courses? The class picked them.
The class decided
The
together,
class-
right? What
the
they
class
wanted to
decided
study.
what the elective would be. And they began to have lectures, which was considered, again,
That was novel at the
something
time,
new,
right?
right?
Yeah.
And they emphasized a lot of critical thinking. And then one of the other things I think is important is that they had a faculty leave program. Now, that was really unheard of, and these were not funded. The president here, L.A. Johnson, he started to get younger faculty. Recall that photo we had? They
Yes,
all looked
yes,
kind of
where they
old.
looked old.
Now we got a lot of young faculty in, and he wanted them to have a year off to go someplace to get more progressive ideas. And so some of our youngest faculty, they went to University of Chicago, they went to Columbia University.
Yep.
This is
To
this little,
Yale, to Harvard,
This is
yeah.
a little school that is sending their students there. So I'm proud of that.
That's
I
right.
think that was really wonderful. So the
So cutting edge pedagogy.
right,
Yeah.
right. That was it.
Curricular influence.
Then the second one is, whoops, let me go back here, personal
To
attention
attention.
to students.
That's right. And we can still say
From
that
the
that's
from the
fully
very
in effect.
beginning, I think that has been foundational for Trinity University. That even Tawakana, Waxahachie, Woodlawn, the idea of the faculty being very much focused on the students and not just detached, but very much involved in their lives, and that it was because of that kind of a relationship that we built up the loyalty of the school that we have had over the years. And I want to tell just one
You
story.
do have one good story,
I
right?
got one good
Yeah,
story.
Yeah.
This is the photograph of Professor Pittman, and this is of the student Bone. He's a little bit older in that photo. He was younger when
this
this
happened.
And I came across some correspondence of a letter that this student Bone wrote back to his parents, telling him about this experience. And now they'll be able to see it. And if you can get the feeling
From
for
19, from 1880.
from
where he's writing to
1880,
his
I may just take
parents.
a look and say, where he says, after I prepared my piece, Dr. Pittman would go to the chapel with me every few nights, and this went on for weeks, and gave instructions as to the delivery. When I had a sore throat, he invited me to his home and read aloud for me, illustrating the proper influences and gestures. Such kindness I am not used to. When I thanked him for his kindness and attention and regretted that I had no way of repaying him, he responded, "Make a man of yourself, and I will be more than repaid." So somehow that touched me as saying, look, I could give you hundreds of other illustrations, but that one is one I thought, that's wonderful that somebody, back then when the teachers were so informal, that he was getting a personal touch at Trinity. Okay.
Well, I love that story because I think it's how faculty feel today. You know,
Right.
that you want your students to take it forward into their work that they're going to do. And I know you're going to
Right.
show us some pictures of
Right,
faculty
right.
that work
They're
with
just
students.
faculty.
And over the years, you see the
Right,
one-on-one
right,
relationships
right.
at play.
No, I had this is really just a story. Just one thing I wanted to say was I came across this from a student. This is a student talking to me. She had been absent. She had missed 2 or 3 weeks due to illness, and she was very fearful that she was not going to be able to handle the course. And the professor said to her, "You've got a big hill to climb, but I'm going to climb it with you. I thought that
So
was,
sweet.
how could you have anything better than that? Okay, so where are we now? What do we want to do next?
Well, I think next we want to see if we have any questions that people want to ask
Okay.
us. Otherwise,
Have we stirred up any questions?
have we stirred up some action? Well, we do have a participant who has said that Judy Holsley's writing that she certainly benefited from the student-teacher personal attention. So maybe Judy will write back to us and tell us what year that was. That would be fun to know. And one of your former students has written in. Curtis Odell, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, that he earned an A- in your biblical studies class, and it was one of his proudest accomplishments at Trinity.
All right. Well, I had a reputation of being a tough grader, okay?
Yes, I've heard that.
They've heard that. But the grading, I won't get too much into that, but the grading was really very, very tight then. I mean, there was no idea that everybody's going to get A's or everybody's going to get B's. It was assumed you're going to get A's, B's, C's, D's, and probably some F's. And so a C would meant you're okay. But that's kind of changed. But if you got an A-, I think we could change that to an A or an A+. All right? Because that's what I would have probably given you nowadays. But
and if he had won the racquetball challenge that I've heard of, where if you could play Dr. Brackenridge in racquetball and beat him, that was a full A. Is that what you told me?
I told them this would be in the 1970s.
1970s. All y'all
60s,
from the 70s.
60s and 70s.
There's
probably.
no one who's going to write in because.
Right. Where I was playing racquetball. Back then we played with a tennis ball, and it was a really fast game. And I played with Coach Norris and Coach Potter, and that I was playing with the best, so that I had a feeling that I could beat, and I had played around with students, that I could beat any student if they hadn't been playing with these guys, and they hadn't. So I said, I will give you an A if you can beat me, but here are the conditions. We had areas there where you could view the game, that you have to be aware that I'm going to encourage people to come and watch the game. And that I get to serve first.
Oh.
I get to serve first.
The intimidation factor.
Right, I get to serve first. And so, I had some really active ones. They were ready for me. Well, I would serve first. I would serve out. They never got a chance to hit the ball. Okay. And so, and if we went to a second game, it'd be the same thing. You know, even if I let them serve once, they wouldn't get a point. But when it came to the third game, and the other thing was they had to report back to the class. That was the other thing. They had to report.
There was no silent
But when it came to
humiliation.
the third game, I said, all right, now I'm going to teach you how to play the game. And I showed, now you shouldn't stand here, you should do this and do that. And then we played another game, and they could score 5 or 6 points. So I wasn't as mean as what I thought. I felt that was a teaching.
By the third game, you gave him the teaching and learning
I showed them how to
opportunity.
improve. And if we had played over and over, they'd have beat me. Okay.
Yeah, but you didn't.
But when we back to
You
the classroom, they had to write on the board what the score was, to the students. So, but nobody ever beat me. But the other question was, what happened if somebody would beat you? I said, I would never have given them an A, obviously, but I said I had such things as that I would have an emergency panic. I would have a heart attack. The games were ruled out. That something that came up that would make this game, invalid. And I hate to say this, but sometimes if I really wanted to intimidate them, I'd kneel down and pray before I started the game. That really got them. but I was never threatened. And can I use the word ass?
You were sure.
Okay.
I think so.
That one time at
From the Pig and the
at
Pope.
commencement at the alumni reunion. Some students come up to you sometime and they say, Dr. Brackenridge, I liked your call. Oh, you changed my life and so forth, And I saw this student coming toward me, and I recognized that he was my student, but I didn't remember much about him. But he came up to me and he says, Dr. Brackenridge, he says, you kicked my ass playing racquetball. And he walked away.
I think that was a good use of that term.
At least I was remembered.
Yes, you were remembered. Well,
Okay, another
Curtis
question?
reminded you. Let's see, yes. Let's see. I'm trying to. What do you think was Trinity's most prosperous era, and how do you think these past 150 years have prepared us for disrupting higher education for the next 150 years.
Okay, did you say disrupting?
Disrupting, yes. So there are a couple
Well-
of things you could answer here.
Well, I think what the past, the past 150 years, it says something about what makes an institution successful, and you have to have a vision. Okay, you got to have that.
We've talked about that.
Without a vision, people perish. So about the vision, you have to have some flexibility. That your goal, your vision may be the same, but how you implement that may be quite different in different periods and different times. But there is this idea that you have certain standards that you want to maintain, and so I think that what Trinity can learn from the past that it's going to enable it to do in the future is exactly what we've been talking about. You've got to keep up with the progressive teaching methods. It's changed since my day. And I think it's changed for the better. Much more interactive now, and much more experiential related, and critical thinking. They keep emphasizing that, and this idea of personal attention. That if we lose that, for particularly a school like Trinity, if we lose that, we become like a lot of other schools. And so I think that Trinity is well prepared. And say, when was the most prosperous part? Well, the most prosperous part was when finally, in 1966, we had somebody give us an endowment of about $25 million. And in our terms, modern terms, that's $100 million or more. That for the first time in our history, we had some kind of really substantial financial underpinning. So we have that, but we always need to keep improving it, because even though we have a fairly high endowment, now expenses are even more. And if you want to keep up, if you want to do the things that you need to do, you need to keep growing that. But those are just some of the things that I think, if we can implement them in the future, that no matter what way it goes, that we ought to be all right.
So, because we've talked about crisis, but we've also talked about overcoming adversity, or risk and reward, and so
right. Well, and
vision.
That idea that with this, most of what Trinity's history was aspiration.
That's right.
It wasn't reality. It was aspiration.
And continues to be real aspiration.
Right. It's still the same. Right. It's still we haven't arrived. I mean, that's even in terms of faith. I've always said, faith is not a destination. Faith is a journey. It's a journey. You don't arrive. You keep going. You've got more things to do.
Well, I know we've been using the phrase heirs of the past, stewards of the future, and to keep thinking about that future, right? What we've learned from the past, and all that we've inherited, and the people who along the way have made it possible to have this. And I know you have a quote from the former President Anderson that we were going to show too, because I think it's one thing that we've talked about, sort of what you take away from Trinity.
Right. Well, this President Anderson, we have a President Anderson right now. We have a President Jesse Anderson. And he was one of the young faculty that went to University of Chicago. He was one of those. And this is at the time when they were having to move from Tawakona to Waxahachie, and everything was down. Nobody knew what was going to happen, what the future. But he said, as to the possibilities of Trinity University, no one can tell how great her future may be. And I think that if I go to this next one, that's the future.
Yeah.
But I often say, President Anderson, Jesse, I think he would be in awe, but he wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be surprised. No.
And that's impressed you about Trinity, right? That's
what really has impressed me about Trinity. So now can I tell a few stories?
Sure, you can tell
we got
a few
any
stories.
Time or we
no. And also, don't forget that you brought this
my
artifact.
hat. I
wanted
forgot
you
that.
to remember
I did
to
forget
show that.
All right, I'm going to put it on. Well, this hat's too small. But again, when you get to be my age, I mean, short-term memory, it goes. But I arrived on the campus like a first year,
yeah.
like a freshman student. Didn't know anybody, didn't know anything about the school, didn't know any people. One other incident I had when I came, the chair of the department said, a lot of people go to University Presbyterian Church, and you'll meet some people there that you be welcome you. And so they did. Everybody was really friendly. And the chair said to me, well, what did you think of that? And I said, oh, that was nice. I said, there was one man there. I said, he just asked me a lot of questions and seemed so interested in me. He said, well, what did he look like? I said, well, he was tall, he had gray hair, and he had glasses. He says, that's the president of the university. I had no idea who he was. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
and that beanie's from Jess Neal, our archivist. A lot of people don't know that Trinity has archives and an archivist, right? And
right.
she helped you to get that.
Right, and that Jess Neal, who's now the archivist, has really done a great job of doing things to get more and more online and the records management program going, and so that anybody who is interested in history would want to go to the archives, and they'll find people very helpful there. I volunteer down the archives, and so I'm around a lot.
People have been sending us all sorts of items, which we're really thankful for. So if people want to keep sending us things for the archives, I know we just got a letter sweater from someone in our office, Angie Vallejo, whose uncle was in the Hall of Fame. So keep sending those to us as well.
Right.
So we have a few minutes left. What is one of? I know we had a couple of stories that you wanted to tell.
Let me tell the Waxahachie story.
Okay, tell the Waxahachie
Remember,
story.
I told you in Waxahachie that when they said you had to be dry, they had to
Yes.
eliminate all liquor. Well, not only did Waxahachie go dry, the whole county went dry. So you couldn't legally get any alcohol in the county, so in Ellis County. So one of the administrators at Trinity, I will not name him here on this, but he came to me one day and he said, Doug, would you like to know how I paid my tuition at Trinity? Oh, I'm working on the history. Yeah, tell me. Well, he says, I'd get me 2 shopping bags, and I'd get on the urban trolley, and I'd go to Dallas, and I'd fill those 2 bags with liquor. And I'd come back and I'd sell them to the students. And he says, I earned all I had to do is make another trip to Dallas. So I use that as saying, you think these kids back then didn't do things that were a little what we would consider a little creepy. But that's how he managed to get his tuition paid. The other story that I really would like to tell too is. About Dr. Laurie. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether I
want to show that picture of the hole
I don't know if I can get
yeah,
back that far.
Of course we can.
Let's see if I can get back that far.
People can see that big opening.
Yeah, where is it? There we go.
We're getting close.
I think it was more yeah, here we go.
There it is.
Was that
forward.
it?
One forward. There it is.
There it is.
Yep.
Well, I don't have a laser pointer, but look in the lower left-hand corner, and you can see there's just a concrete pad there.
That's right.
And the story behind this was told to me by somebody who was in the office when Dr. Laurie was talking on the phone. And back in Dr. Laurie's day, he didn't close the door. He never closed the door of the president unless it was something really, really, really big. And so if he was on the phone, he would just motion you, come in, sit down. So the person that told me this, he was sitting there, he was talking to his contractor. And what Dr. Laurie had said to the contractor was he had asked the contractor that he wanted to get this auditorium started because the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church was going to meet in San Antonio, I forget, 1969 or 1970. He wanted that auditorium built so that the General Assembly could meet there and people would come to the campus, and that was his goal.
Yeah.
But the money wasn't there, money was still very tight. And so he said, I think the figure was $30,000, maybe $20,000. But he said to the contractor, if you will go in and just carve out, the rock and put in a flat foundation,
yeah.
just a pad,
right.
that's all. he says, I'll have the money for you in 30 days. So this is Laurie at the end of 30 days calling the contractor back. And so he says to the contractor, they say, how are you doing, how are you doing? And Laurie says, well, he says, I've got some bad news and I've got some good news for you. What do you want to hear first? And so the contractor says, well, give me the bad news. He says, I don't have the $20,000. He says, well, what's the good news? He says, how would you like to be the first donor for the new auditorium? And according to the, there was kind of a gulping and a kind of a, and he did. I mean, he did it pro bono. But that's part of this, part of the lore of Trinity, of these ways of dealing with adversity.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay,
we always have a comeback.
You find a way. Okay.
Well, we're getting to the end of our time. I want to tell people that you are going to be in Dallas on the Trinity on tour, so people can learn a little bit more from you and see you there. So
I've given away all
hope
my
that
stories.
people will
I've given
come.
away.
No,
I'll make some up. I'll make up some new ones. Right.
Doug is also going to be doing a food for thought with Dr. Charlene Davis, where they're going to talk about branding Trinity University, and that's going to be on February 4th. It's going to be an evening event, dinner at Paisano's, if I remember correctly. So those are two good ways to learn more about Trinity's history. We have a next webinar coming up, The Learning Together, which is going to be our co-chair, Jacob Tingle, who is going to be talking with Twyla Huff about engaging student athletes in leadership and career development, which I think will be really interesting. That sounds good, right?
Very interesting.
And we really want to plug the February 1 kickoff that's going to be happening on the Trinity campus as well as through alumni chapters around the world. We have chapters who are going to be involved before that day, on that day, or shortly after that day. And we're going to be throwing Trinity a birthday party in the way that we know best, which is to do an afternoon of community service, to do good in our communities. And then we're going to come back and have a birthday party at Trinity University. It's going to be from 5 to 7:30 on campus, and we're even going to have fireworks. So we're really excited about that. And we want to thank our whole community for taking part in that, as well as all the people who've been planning for that birthday party. And we have a few minutes left, so I know that we want to thank Taylor and Josh for making us feel so good here, the whole SCM team, because this has been a really great experience for us. And we want to thank Alumni Relations and Development, Ryan, who's here, and Salim, who is in Bangladesh, who's been working with us and the whole team there, because it's been so fun as an alum and a faculty member to do this. And who else do we want to thank? And what are our final words in these last minutes? Thank everybody for watching. And we're sorry we didn't get to all your questions. One that I saw was, does the president still live on Oakmont? He does. And we can tell you on the 150th anniversary, he lives at 150 Oakmont. And I have a feeling you'll be seeing that tying into the alumni weekend festivities, perhaps.
At the 100th anniversary, he was 139 Oakmont. He was in the house that O'Neill Ford built. But they
please write in. Say you want more hours of good stories with us.
Right.
No.
But again, I think in conclusion, in terms of my experience was, I got to know these people. They weren't just names anymore, and that I remember going to the cemetery at Tuakana. And I saw the stone there for Luther Apelles Johnson. That would have meant nothing to me, but I knew Luther Apelles Johnson, and I knew from reading that the students took a procession, took the coffin down there, and then they had a very nice inscription on there, and I thought, who knows Luther Apelles Johnson? I know him, and it's people like Luther Apelles Johnson, that names forgotten. They're the kind of people who help make the university what it is. I hope we can do the same in our generation, right? But you're going to do it, right? I'm finished. You're going to do it now. So
thank you, Doug Brackenridge. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. How did we do?